welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast as we set the stage for the final full week of September here. It's going to end on a big note for the Nittany Lions football team, a top 20 matchup in Beaver Stadium, prime time, 7:30 kickoff on NBC between number 9 Penn State and number 19 Illinois. Not sure that any of us forecasted the potential for this kind of a Big Ten battle to be brewing in late September, but Illinois 4-0 on the season. They jumped 5 spots in the AP Top 25 poll following their Friday night victory at Nebraska. So they come to town with a lot of momentum. Penn State certainly generated a fair amount of it on its own with the 56-0 victory over Kent State as it concluded non-conference action. As usual, we came to you fresh out of Beaver Stadium with a post-game podcast Saturday night, spent about 40 minutes or so with Daniel Gallen, breaking down our initial takeaways from that matchup. We'll spend a little time looking back at the blowout win and starting to look forward to the Big Ten opener right now with Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen. We just spent some time back in Beaver Stadium on Monday afternoon, as we always do, with James Franklin. It was his weekly press conference. You can view that in its entirety over at Lions247.com, along with plenty coming out of it. We'll get into those in just a moment. But Mark, going back to Saturday, 56-0 win, dominance from both sides of the ball. What were your overall takeaways?
Kind of mission accomplished. I know you guys went into it after the game, but some of the things that stood out to me: 80 different Penn State players saw action. If the participation chart was accurate, 25 different guys made tackles, 8 guys scored touchdowns, 13 different players caught passes. All of those things, I think, bode well for your depth and just for being able to see some of the younger players that we really hadn't seen. So, unfortunately, a couple of key injuries, Dom DeLuca, Cam Wallace. We'll find out probably more about that as the week goes along. Ideally, you want to come out of a game like that healthy. Again, you get dinged up a little bit, a couple more injuries on a team, and they're kind of starting to build up. That's the one negative, but overall, I don't think there was much not to like. I mean, I thought Penn State would score more points, but when you look at the yardage differential, 718 to 67 or whatever it was, to me, that tells you everything that you need to know.
Yeah, the largest differential in school history. Daniel, maybe you can remind me of the stat. I think it was the largest yardage differential period in college football in more than a decade, was it?
It was the biggest yardage differential in an FBS versus FBS game in the past 20 years.
Okay. Yeah. So that'll get the job done. And we talked about it a lot, Daniel. Some of the top performers coming out of the matchup. We did a lot of that digging on Saturday night. But Penn State offers us an assist every Sunday. They put out their staff picks for players of the week. It was Drew Aller on offense. It was Abdul Carter on defense.
And Omari Evans.
Oh, I'm sorry. And Omari Evans got tagged on there, deservedly so, with Drew Aller. I forgot they're giving out the co-players of the week pretty frequently now. And then Zachary Nelson, who we'll get into a little bit later with the linebacker depth discussion. He was special teams pick. Daniel, you put together that rundown for us on Sunday afternoons these days. So anything stand out to you aside from me missing Omari Evans on the initial rundown?
People are not giving the receivers enough credit, Tyler, and you just kept that going.
Yeah, we're not writing enough about them.
We'll touch on it later in the show. What I'm talking about.
No, I mean, I think that those 3 or those 4 players, it makes sense if you watch the game. I mean, Evans was very close to having that second touchdown from Bo Prabula. I mean, I think he probably got stopped at like the 1 foot line, maybe. And then to see Abdul Carter, he'd been splashing through those first couple of weeks, but to see him get a stat, get a sack, get the quarterback on the ground, I think that was big. And, I appreciate the, getting the special teams player of the week from the coaching staff, because that's something to the naked eye that can be pretty hard to watch. I mean, when I'm doing the game balls and I do my special teams player of the game, I mean, I'm usually just looking at punter, kicker, kickoff specialist, and returners. I mean, there's a lot of nuances in there, and I think that lines up. Justin Lustig, during the bye week when we spoke to him over Zoom, he talked about Zachary Nelson really coming along on special teams, and that bore out. He didn't finish the game with any statistics, but evidently he was doing what Penn State needed him to do out there. And I think that's what you want to see from someone who's trying to take a step forward in his career, make that impact on special teams, get that coaching staff's attention, and maybe it's a little confidence booster for you moving forward.
James Franklin was excited to make sure that we all knew in the press conference that 8 different Nittany Lions reached the end zone for those touchdowns on Saturday. You had Tyler Warren, Nick Singleton, Liam Clifford, Drew Aller as a runner, Omari Evans, Khalil Dinkins, Cam Wallace, and Bo Prabula each getting involved with touchdowns against Kent State. Mark, out of all those guys who reached the end zone, which one do you want to begin with as we kind of work our way through takeaways?
Listen, I'm going to go with the guy who didn't reach the end zone, and Luke Reynolds. I thought he
What
had
an answer. What? And I give you eight guys score a touchdown, and you
were any of those catches more impressive than what he did?
No.
I mean, I was like, wow, that was something. No, I'll go with Khalil Dinkins because we were really wondering how he was going to come along. And then if you look at the catch that he made, James Franklin last week was talking about how athletic he is, and he really climbed the ladder to get that. So I think to have a second tight end step up, I think that was a real positive for them.
Absolutely. And Daniel, we're going to get to some of the depth conversations coming out of this matchup, but we've got to see a lot more of the depth. Instead of it just being, excuse my voice here, instead of it just being kind of projections from us about, who might pop up at linebacker, who might show up in different spots, we got to see it. So we've had some chance to digest that a little bit. 15 Penn State players made their college debut. Several of them, most of them were freshmen. Coming out of it now, about 48 hours away from kickoff. Among that group, who really stood out to you and left you wanting to see more moving forward?
I think I'm going to go with Anthony Specca at linebacker. We saw him a lot in the second half. Kobe King had a really quick hook. Tony Rojas didn't play after halftime, and they really turned it over to those young guys. Tamir Robinson got a lot of run, which I think we were really excited to see after his absence. And then Anthony Specca got some run. James Franklin said that he was running the defense, which is what you want to see from that Mike linebacker. And I thought that he performed well, finished the game as the leading tackler, did some nice things out there. I know that we are really, really zeroed in on that linebacker depth right now, considering Dominic DeLuca's potential injury, Tamir Robinson's absence for a game, all the different moving parts they have there, Dakari Nelson joining the fold. And so I think to see one of those true freshmen who, in all honesty, who knows if we're going to see Specca for more than 4 games during the regular season, but to see him come out there and look like he belonged, look like he knew what he was doing, I think that was a really big positive to take away from that debut group.
A team high 5 tackles on 20 snaps. You saw Dakari Nelson and Tamir Robinson both get 17 snaps, which on this particular afternoon was about 40% of the total defensive work. This is a defensive unit that only had to face 43 offensive snaps over the course of the day from Kent State, who managed to produce 67 yards. And sticking on that linebacker conversation, Mark, because we brought it up with James Franklin today, and then he kind of went through that trio of rising talent. He also mentioned Tyler Elsdon, but he's a 5th-year guy. We've seen him as a starter. I think there's a lot more curiosity about the younger components here. Daniel mentioned Specca. To me, Dakari Nelson is somebody who seems to be a little more accelerated in his development at linebacker than maybe even the staff anticipated when he moved from safety. But Tamir Robinson seems to be the most ready for the moment. And it was pretty clear to us in preseason camp. We had a VIP story up in mid-August about his progress and all the great things we were hearing. He was ready to hit the ground running, it felt like, from the first game on. Had to wait a little bit for his moment, but 3 tackles, one of them for a loss, playing in the box with Specca. And I just feel like if we're looking beyond that top foursome, that's been important, especially if Don DeLuca is not going to be part of it, maybe this week or maybe a little bit moving forward. Tamir Robinson is probably the first name at the top of my list that I think sees the boost in consistent work. Because like Daniel referenced, Specca, you've got the redshirt conversation to consider.
Yeah, I think that game was big for all 3 of them. Going through your snap counts, Specca 20 snaps, Nelson and Robinson 17. I think the fact that they were able to get out there and actually contribute and looked at home, I know you're talking about Robinson, but, for a guy like Specca, just to go back to him, I don't think they're going to need him this year. But if they do need him, he looks to me like a guy that's not too big of a stage for, that he can go out there. I'm not going to say he's going to be a star, but if there's a couple more injuries and you need to rely on him, I think they would be comfortable, getting him out there, because it looked like that wasn't too big. But yeah, Tamir, it was too bad he got banged up in that West Virginia game, or I think he would have had a bunch more snaps now. But to be able to go out and do that, especially before facing a team like Illinois, when we don't know what DeLuca's situation is, I think it was big. I mentioned it last week that when we were at practice, he was really flying around, and he's a big kid and he's fast, and Joe Paterno used to say it about Rob Holmberg. He has good shock. Like when he hits people, he kind of gets into them. So I think he has all those tools to be a contributor, and to be able to log that many snaps in that game, to me, was big moving forward, especially because we don't know what DeLuca's status is.
One more thing on Specca. Franklin said he appreciated how the freshman was able to help run the defense, which is that's quite a statement from a guy in game 3. And I actually heard from Kobe King coming out of preseason camp, and he said that one thing that Specca does really well is he can communicate. He's an intelligent communicator, and he's a guy that we've heard really picked up the playbook quickly, was physically prepared like his former high school teammate, Peter Gonzalez. Both those guys were kind of lumped together by strength coach Chuck Losey as showing up and being ready to compete. Gonzalez gets sidelined during preseason camp, but here is Specca trying to break through and crack through the linebacker conversation moving forward. Daniel, when we talk,
Tyler, let me add one more thing.
Sure, go ahead.
Remember when with the Bowling Green game that Franklin said in the first half, they were having trouble communicating with the headsets.
Yeah.
And so that's a whole new thing. You have a true freshman dealing with that out there. We'll talk about some of the moves they made to help address that, but I just think for him to be dealing with all of that stuff and still looks like he belonged, again, I think he's headed for a red shirt, but you never know when you're going to need somebody. And if they need him, I think he's going to be ready.
Daniel, I texted you and Mark on Sunday morning with a question. Who do you think led this defense in total snaps? It was Dejan Lane, who we spent a lot of time discussing on our pregame podcast last week, and the importance of what they were going to be trying to accomplish without KJ Winston available, an absolute star at the safety spot. And lo and behold, it didn't take a matter of 3 or 4 weeks to see James Franklin let him get some work back deep, with Jalen Reed getting some work at the line. We actually saw Jalen Reed essentially do a 50-50 split between his role as a safety at the back end of the secondary and then filling that role in the box and in the slot over the course of this matchup. He didn't play a bunch, which is good news, but ultimately, James Franklin made this sound like a step forward for Dejan Lane, like kind of getting something checked off the box. And that means you're maybe one step forward toward operating this defense precisely how they'd prefer to do it.
We talk about it a lot in terms of matching what James Franklin or other coaches say versus what we see on the field. And so to hear during the week, to hear Franklin say, we want to get Dejan Lane a lot of work. We need him. We need him to step up. Coming into Saturday, you wanted to see if they would actually follow through on that. And to put him out there, I think it was the second defensive possession of the game. I think that signaled that we want to get this guy work, and to not only just have him back there with Wheatley or with Reed, to have him on the field with both of them and have Reed at the Lion position. I think that shows that they're serious about having Dejan Lane be a piece of this defense moving forward, that wasn't just sort of lip service, I guess, to just say that you want to get guys work. You have to actually see it and to actually kind of go through. I don't want to call it a dry run because it's still an FBS team. It's still live, all that stuff. But to be able to do that against a team like Kent State, and to put those pieces together to maybe see how they'll fit in a real game instead of just practice, I think that's really big for Penn State moving forward, and they can figure out how to adjust from there. Dejan Lane got good feedback from James Franklin after the game, that in terms of the amount of respect that they have for him and the job that he's done since he's been here. Lane's teammates agreed with that. Jalen Reed said that Lane was probably a little nervous there to be out there at that juncture, but acquitted himself well. Abdul Carter said that he's mature, that it was probably a bit of a shock to him at first to really be out there in those situations, but he's taken advantage of the opportunity. Jalen Kimber said that he has the next man up mentality, that he did what he needed to do and what he knew he needed to do. So it seems like Lane is someone where there's a lot of respect for him among his teammates and from the coaching staff. And I think that was really big for Penn State to put him out there, get him that much work in that kind of scenario, especially with a team like Illinois, who has a quarterback who's playing pretty well coming to town this weekend.
We did see Tyrese Mills involved to a decent extent at safety as well, but Dejan Lane was the most active beyond that starting lineup and ultimately played
One
more.
thing on Mills is that I will say that Jalen Reed kept going out of his way to bring up Tyrese Mills and him getting work back there at safety. I know that we haven't seen much of him since he's been here, but I think Jalen Reed is one of those people that I view as a pretty reliable narrator of things going on. And when he says something, I really think it's worth listening. So I'm curious to see how far they dip into that safety depth moving forward.
Yeah, we saw a little bit of Abu Torre, Antoine Belgrave Shorter, Colin Dinkins, Lamont Payne, but it was kind of just a scattered snaps for that group versus clearly an effort to get Dejan Lane comfortable and kind of feeling some foundation out there. And all of a sudden, until further notice, Lane feels like the most important freshman on this Penn State roster here in September 2024. The secondary has had some moving pieces with KJ Winston out of the equation. That's obviously a big one, Mark, but we have been told since week one, keep an eye on the starting lineup at cornerback because it's probably going to change, and that has come to fruition. We've seen A.J. Harris get a couple starts, Jalen Kimber get a couple starts, Cam Miller get a couple starts, and Elliott Washington adds his name to that list. He was a starter out there opposite of Jalen Kimber for the Kent State matchup. You saw Cam Miller playing inside kind of as a repercussion of what we saw with KJ Winston's absence. But a few more revelations coming out of today's press conference, and that's the fact that A.J. Harris was dealing with a stomach virus late last week. James Franklin indicated it was still impacting him, Saturday going into the weekend. So he missed some practice action. He ultimately did not start this time around. He averaged 50 snaps per game the first couple of weeks. But Harris was, kind of on reserve duty for this one. He wanted to make it clear that Elliott Washington is someone they view as an ascending figure. He earned a starting opportunity, but that comes with a caveat that A.J. Harris wasn't 100% available. And so what do you make of this cornerback room, Mark? With a 3-game sample size, we've gotten long looks at just about everybody up at the top of the group, except Davian Collins, who's maxed out at 15 snaps in a game to this point. But Zion Tracy's a guy who's gotten some run in that line work. Elliott Washington's now starting. There's a lot to consider here with, as Daniel said, a hot quarterback, Luke Altmaier, coming to town for Illinois.
So far, at least, I don't think we've seen any highs or lows, regardless of what group has been out there. And they've mixed and matched all of those different guys. And I think, to date, that's been a positive. And they've been facing some quarterbacks who, obviously last week you can't really, talk about because the 2 kids got hurt, unfortunately. But before that, you're facing 2 pretty solid quarterbacks. And so, yeah, for that first half against Bowling Green, I thought the entire defense didn't look very good, but I thought they picked it up in the second half. And overall, I just don't know that it's been noticeably different. And to me, I guess that's a good thing. So when you're in a situation where A.J. Harris is under the weather, you feel comfortable putting Elliott Washington in there, and he played again. It's hard to judge by that competition, but he played well. So that's going to be part of the fun of this game. Is Illinois the number 19 team in the nation? I'm not sure about that, but it's a quality Big Ten team with a very good coach, and we've seen what that guy's capable of doing offensively. I don't know that it's going to be as run-oriented as maybe we've seen in the past. You talk about the quarterback, but it's going to be fun to see how some of these younger guys perform now that you're in the Big Ten.
Kent State completed 2 passes for 18 yards on Saturday. So how much did we learn about the cornerback group? I don't know, but that's going to change, I think, significantly on Saturday. Something else we're keeping tabs on with the defense, Daniel, is where Tom Allen will be coaching this unit from. He was on the sidelines earlier this season, first couple games. Then he was in the booth on Saturday for the Kent State matchup, and James Franklin joked that was a decision that came because the weather forecast was through, and Tom didn't want to get wet on the sideline. But in all seriousness, this is a guy who was accustomed to running the show on his own sideline the last 7 seasons as the Indiana Hoosiers head coach, and this is part of the adjustment process. It's kind of felt like since these guys got together for their interview last December that Tom Allen and James Franklin are kind of filling each other out, trying to make sure they press the right buttons, and this is the latest example of that.
Yeah, I think it's it's an interesting adjustment for Tom Allen. I think that we talked about having the two new coordinators come in, but this offseason, but they're on different trajectories, sort of where Andy Kotelnicki is on the way up and Tom Allen is taking that step back after being a head coach for so long. So I think that there is a bit of an adjustment, and maybe we discounted that a little bit, and we were just sort of like, oh yeah, he's just going back to calling the plays now. It's going to be easier for him. It's less for him to do, but I think that that's still an adjustment. James Franklin said that they're going to look at it as a week to week thing on whether or not Tom Allen is up in the booth. Personally, I see this as something that you don't want to disrupt that routine by changing it up every single week. I thought that was something that was interesting to me. Something else that James Franklin said that caught my attention was at the end of the answer. He said that they went ahead and did a dry run on Friday with Tom Allen, and to really get the feel for it, to get the lines of communication down, which lines of communication is something we've been talking about a lot when it comes to the defense. But that'll be an interesting subplot to follow throughout the rest of this year. James Franklin has said it a lot. He said it last year when Mike Yurcich moved to the booth. He said it Saturday. He said it again today that he believes, all things being equal, calling the game in the vacuum is easiest to do from the booth because you can see everything. You're not out in the weather. You can put all your play sheets out, all of that different stuff. So we'll see. We'll see what this looks like. I think that it's one of those under the radar. I don't necessarily want to call it minor, but it's one of those storylines that has popped up here early.
From one defensive coordinator to the other in this Big Ten matchup coming our way Saturday, Aaron Henry, who's calling the plays for Illinois, has to take more into account than he might have before the Kent State matchup because Julian Fleming got involved in a significant way. Liam Clifford did the same. Omari Evans continues to show big play abilities and establishing a career high for catches with 4 of those and yards with 116 after maxing out with 2 receptions and 60 yards at any other point in his career. And we know what Harrison Wallace has put on film, especially in week 1. Oh, by the way, what they're doing at the tight end and wide and running back position, the versatility that's been reflected there. James Franklin was quick to kind of draw in the tight end and the running backs as part of that conversation when I asked about Liam Clifford and Julian Fleming, producing ahead of Big Ten. But when we talk about receivers, Mark, how do you think, kind of the same deal with cornerbacks, projection versus and expectations versus reality? How do you evaluate this group heading into Big Ten action?
I think that game was key for Clifford and Fleming because they had been stockpiling, putting a bunch of snaps in their back pockets, and we did not really see the production. And I think to see that kind of rewarded, with Clifford getting his first, was that his first touchdown? I think it was.
First touchdown, yeah.
Yeah, and then obviously Fleming doing some really nice things, catching and running with the ball. It's just nice to see them sort of rewarded, and I do think it gives defensive coordinators something else to look at. But also don't forget about the running backs. I know you touched on it, but right now Catron and Nick Singleton have combined for 3 receiving touchdowns, and I think they had 3 all of last year. So they've really incorporated them. We talked about Dinkins, but I don't think you can look at just the receiver group. Harrison Wallace, I think we know what he's all about. To me, Bowling Green's going to go down as sort of an aberration because they got things done with other players. And then for Omari Evans, you asked James about it after the game. Essentially, what's been the difference since you fired Yurcich? You didn't put it that way, but I mean, it has really been eye-popping what that kid has brought to the table. Now you have a legitimate deep threat, and you kind of scratch your head on like, what were they even thinking? Last year. I mean, there was a stat that I had. I mean, I think Aller, I think was 7 of 8 on, or 6 of 7, one of those on passes that went 15 yards or more. And obviously Omari, he's now averaging 25 yards per catch, has been a big part of that. So I think you have your 2 kind of stalwarts, and then you have these other complementary pieces, and we still haven't seen Caden Saunders. So I think I don't know that it's as firmly established as we would have liked to see going into Big Ten play, but I think it's better than it was a couple weeks ago, if that makes sense. And I don't think they have to make any apologies for what they were doing against the caliber of opponent, because, the bottom line is get going, get moving. It's great to be a good blocker. It's great to run good routes and clear things out for other people, but sooner or later you need to produce as well. And Clifford and Fleming both did.
Amari Evans, just to hammer home the eye-popping nature of what has happened, as you called it, Mark, through his first 21 college games prior to the firing of Mike Yurcich, 7 catches, 65 yards, and 1 touchdown. He averaged 9.1 yards per catch during that span. Since Mike Yurcich was fired, Penn State has played 5 regular season games. He's got 10 catches for 290 yards and 2 touchdowns. His average went from 9 yards per catch to 29 yards per catch during those 2 separate spans of his career. And right now, among Big Ten players who have at least 3 receptions on the season, he has the highest yards per catch by 4.5 yards. Nick Marsh has about 21.5 per catch up at Michigan State. But Daniel, I think the point of emphasis here is that wide receiver. We said that 1 breakout might not be enough for you. I think we've got 2 breakouts brewing before we get into Big Ten play. And now you've got Julian Fleming, Liam Clifford, at least gaining some opportunity to go out and produce. I know Fleming was all smiles in the post game. It just feels like the juju, whatever you want to call it with that room, because we had a lot of questions about what that might be. It's in a much different place right now, because part of it is everybody's getting involved a little bit. And the other deal is you now have a little bit of a basis for your argument versus saying, well, this guy might do this.
I think there's a lot of confidence in that room right now. Excuse me. A lot of confidence in that room right now, because now it's not just talking about it. It's not just saying that we're confident. When Omari Evans says after the game that he feels really confident, you turn on the tape and you're like, oh, yeah, for sure. One thing that has stuck out to me about Evans is that we've known that he can run since he got here. I remember talking to Taylor Stubblefield back in, I guess, spring 2022 after Evans enrolled. And he talked about what an interesting project it was to develop Evans, because he was a high school quarterback and you were really operating with a blank slate, that you didn't have any bad habits to break, really. And I think that showed with Evans being able to get on the field early. Now we know that everything isn't linear, as last year showed, but to have him out there and to have him make plays, I think has been really big. And I think that I don't want to get into the chuck it deep conversation again, but I think to not only have that guy out there running to take the top off the defense, but to show that you're willing to throw it to him. And not only are you willing to throw it to him, he will make those catches. He will make those plays. I think that that's something that changes the shape of a defense a little bit. The past couple of days, when thinking about Omari Evans' performance, the one wide receiver who's popped into my head, and I don't know how Mark will feel about this one, but I was thinking about Quez Watkins a lot when he was with the Philadelphia Eagles, where he came out of Southern Miss as this burner. I covered him his rookie year in 2020, and you could just see that speed. But by the time it got to the past 2 years, they just weren't throwing it to him deep, that he'd be out there and would be running these go routes, but it wasn't something that you really had to take seriously. And there are obviously other reasons for that too, with how he was playing, but that's just something that stands out to me, is that it's one thing to say that, yeah, we have this guy who has the speed to take the top off of defense, and defensive coordinators have to account for him, but it's another thing to actually utilize that and put that on tape. So I think that Penn State doing that, I think that that's really, really big. And I think that's going to open things up a little more for Trey Wallace. It's going to open things up for Liam Clifford, maybe Caden Saunders eventually. I mean, Tyler Warren, it doesn't really matter. I think he's going to get his no matter how that defense is loosened up. But I just think that there's a cascading effect from a player like Omari Evans.
Yeah, and Franklin mentioned the catches that Luke Reynolds managed to make, what Khalil Dinkins has done in his return, and all these things are something that Illinois has to take into consideration as they prepare for Saturday. One more note on Omari Evans, who was clocked at 4.31 in the 40-yard dash earlier this year. Is it really this simple? Maybe. He said, quote, regarding Andy Kotelnicki, quote, "He just tells me to run as fast as I can, so that's what I do. The rest is on me and Drew to connect." Again, there's probably a little more to it than that, but they are utilizing Omari Evans clearly in the right way, and it's paying off big time for Penn State and for the junior receiver. How do we do on our bold predictions, guys? Mark suggested we take a quick look back, and so I'm going to let you lead off on this one, Mark. How did things turn out for you? Because we had some fun with our picks for Kent State.
I got hit by the injury bug. I feel bad that Cam went down. I hope he's going to be okay. I thought he and somebody else would each rush for 100 yards. As it played out, nobody was going to get that many carries, and it was really weird. An odd stat in this game: they had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think it was 8 different guys had runs of at least 10 yards, but none were longer than 18. So there wasn't a big explosive play. So I was clearly not the winner. I have a good feel for who was the winner, but I'll let you two give yours, and then we'll decide.
Daniel?
Well, if you said 8 different guys were going to score touchdowns, I would think that there'd be in this kind of game, there'd be a good chance that you had 3 first-timers. Unfortunately, we only had 2. Liam Clifford and Cam Wallace. So I was
close on Quentin Martin. Quentin Martin nearly had the 3rd touchdown because Daniel predicted 3 first-time touchdowns.
But he didn't name him.
Oh, and Antoine Belgrave's shoulder, though. I mean, that was the one where he actually did get to the end zone.
I know. I was close between Quentin Martin, and I had the defensive touchdown in there. I had A.J. Harris written down, and when Belgrave Shorter was running it back, I felt like the smartest man in the Beaver Stadium press box for a couple seconds until that went back by review. But I think that, the way that James Franklin was talking about it, and the more you think about it, 8 different touchdown scores. When you know that there's a team that have guys that can really fill it up, like Tyler Warren can go for multiple touchdowns in a game. We've seen Trey Wallace do it. Drew Aller could do it on the ground. Bo Prabula can do it on the ground. Singleton Allen. To have it spread around like that, lot for Illinois to think about this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And so my bold prediction, which I failed to actually discuss on the podcast last week because I just closed out the show after I gave you my general prediction, but I had 3 tight end touchdowns total, and I just reread it. Did not say touchdown catches, so I'm counting this one as a win. I said at least 1 for Khalil Dinkins, ding, and I said 3 total touchdowns. Tyler Warren caught 1 and he threw 1. So, fellas, I'm going to take the bow on this one and say I got it right.
You also hit the spread exactly, 56.
I peaked. I just peaked in week 3, game 3, a little early, but you're going to have
Kent State. You had your best game of the year against Kent State, like a lot of the Penn State younger players.
Yeah, I have 9 more game predictions, 9 more bold predictions, but it's all downhill from here.
At least
that kind of effort. Yeah, at least. Yeah, good point, Daniel. Let's get into some game week 4 storylines here before we close out the episode. We've got a lot to learn about this game week as things unfold. We're going to have Jeremy Werner on our show midweek to break down the Fighting Illini. He's a fantastic Illinois beat reporter within our 24/7 Sports Network to break down their 4-0 start. But here on home turf in Happy Valley, got a couple injuries to monitor. As Mark mentioned at the top of the show, Cam Wallace didn't look pretty with him exiting the game. Lower body injury, needed help to the sideline from the defensive lineman. And then Dom DeLuca exited after just a few defensive snaps, came back to the sideline, did not return action. It was a blowout game, but James Franklin was asked about both those guys specifically in his press conference Monday. Wasn't ready to go down that road with us. He said a check back in Wednesday. He told us the same thing last week about KJ Winston, and he ended up delivering some bad news on Wednesday. So we will learn more. Obviously, Cam Wallace's situation, if he's not available, you're talking about Quentin Martin as running back 3. But the fact of the matter is Nick Singleton and Katron Allen are going to play over these guys. If Dom DeLuca is unavailable, a very thin discussion that we've been talking about at linebacker becomes even more complicated, and some of those younger components that we discussed probably have to rise up again. What do you make of whiteout energy, Mark? Because that's how it's been phrased to us from James Franklin. They're doing a bunch of teasers over on social media now. It's whiteout ... energy is what they're looking for from the crowd on Saturday in prime time. I wore white today to the press conference. I didn't do that on purpose, but what do you make of what they're trying to generate ahead of this matchup against number 19 Illinois?
I don't quite get it. I wish you would explain what it means. Or do you guys get it? What?
I think they want people to wear white to the game and have a whiteout without calling it a whiteout. That's
right. Okay. Yeah. Well, then but what is? whiteout?
I don't know if they're legally contracted to only have they can't just say, well, this is our school, everyone wear white. But they're really dancing around it. So I guess that's where we're at here, 5 days out of kickoff. I don't know if people are going to be expressly told to wear white, but I'm hearing that between the lines.
Yeah, but okay, so just say wear white. I mean, they do it for road games, right? It's like they're trying to brand something, and I'm not trying to belittle it, but I don't understand it. I don't quite get it. I feel bad. I got poor SID Greg Kincaid in trouble for not wearing white. Everybody else at the press conference from Penn State was in white today, and poor Greg, he got in trouble when I called him out jokingly about it. He didn't really get in trouble. I think
he got replaced up at the dais, but I mean, so yeah, he got
we have
benched.
video of it.
He got benched. Daniel,
no, listen, I'm all for having when this is the first time you're opening Big Ten play at home since I think 2015, maybe it is a special occasion. So maybe they could have done something with that, like wear white, like that the Big Ten finally surrendered, sending Penn State on the road to open every Big Ten season. But yeah, I think you could just say it's white. I don't know. Maybe I should probably ask Grace if there's something I'm missing. She's young. She might have a better idea. There may be something that the kids know. Daniel, you're younger. Do you get it?
No, I mean, I think that it goes back to basically marketing. Like, they come in and they brand one game as the whiteout coming into the year. That's the one that you circle on the calendar. That's the one that you gear up for. Over the summer, James Franklin talked about all the different things that go into picking the whiteout in terms of opponent, team time, everything like that. And, I think that I remember how people responded back over the summer when Brett McMurphy tweeted out the potential primetime NBC lineup, and Penn State's only home game there was the Illinois game. People weren't happy. People were like, that can't be the whiteout. Illinois can't be the whiteout. We just did, Minnesota and Iowa as the whiteout for the past 2 years. Like, we're not going to do that. And it's something that I don't really think you can change. You can't start swimming upstream now with it. So, I mean, I do think as the week goes on, it'll get a little more explicit from the powers that be to wear white. But I do not think that, this will be the whiteout. Part of that is just like marketing 101. Like, you want to have that scarcity. You want to have one whiteout a year. If you dilute that by having, 2 whiteouts during the year, I thought that the helmet stripe is kind of a creative workaround around that. And then one of our moderators on our message board made a good point that, like, if suddenly Illinois is 4-0 and ranked and coming to your house, and suddenly you're like, oh no, this is the whiteout now. Like, we have to white out against Illinois. I think that betrays a little bit of something if you were to do it that publicly. So I just think that it's a workaround. I think that, the whiteout is really cool. I've talked about it. Like, the first one I went to in 2021, like, I'm like anyone who's in media, like, I was skeptical of the hype. But that Auburn game, I was like, oh yeah, like, I get it. And I think that Penn State is put in a really tough position by the TV networks now, with the games that are going to be your biggest games ending up in that noon slot, where when they did that very, very unscientific poll in 2022 about what people liked about the whiteout, and they put having it at night as the number one thing. So I just think that they're in a tough spot. They're trying to make the best of it. I think saying like whiteout energy is is kind of the way that you can talk around it a little bit, but for all intents and purposes, like, it's an unofficial whiteout at this point.
When Washington loses to Rutgers on Friday, this will all make sense.
Well, Washington already lost to
Washington State.
Washington
State. Yeah, I was going to say Eastern Michigan, who they beat in week 2 pretty handily. That would have been a really bad loss. But this is not the same Washington team that finished last year in the national championship game, of course. I think everyone understands that. It's not the same coaching staff. They had a roster exodus. And so it's not like everyone was like, oh my gosh, that's an obvious choice. November 9th, Washington's coming after you play Ohio State for your whiteout game. And so we'll see what happens. End of the day, it matters what those 60 minutes of football, what goes on the field. But James Franklin, very much about messaging with his program. And I'm going to replace the ellipsis in between whiteout and energy with a wink now, because it feels more like a whiteout wink.
There you go.
Yeah,
that's kind of the vibe I was getting from James during the post-game press conference, and now I'm getting it from the social media accounts affiliated with Penn State. We'll see what happens. We'll be in the press box. I don't know if we'll be wearing white, but we'll see what everyone else is wearing on Saturday. Mark, are you surprised by this point spread? This is a 17.5 is where this thing is right now. We look at Caesars Sportsbook. I've seen it at 18 over at DraftKings. But this is the largest point spread that a 4-0, number 19 ranked Illinois team will face, generally speaking, since October 2021, when they were 24-point underdogs in Happy Valley and escaped with a 9 overtime victory. So it feels like if you want to play up the disrespect card in Illinois' locker room right now, there's an example that they could point to.
Yeah, I actually have to do my predictions on Sunday morning, which is very difficult to do because of the Nitwits TV show that we tape. I have to confess, I picked it 34-17, but part of that was a strategy play going higher than some other people. So, no, I thought it would be more like 12 or 13, something like that. So I am a little bit surprised by that. And I think it probably – what we're seeing, I think, is that the bookies, the people who actually this matters to money-wise, have a better feel or feel better about where Penn State is than maybe the poll voters, right? I mean, clearly they think that there's no bias at all involved there. Everything they do is based on how much money they make. So that's what it's about. So am I surprised? Yeah, a little bit. I thought it would have been a few points less.
Yeah, this is one of 3 ranked opponents right now on Penn State's schedule as things currently stand. 19 Illinois. You've got number 13 USC awaiting for a road trip in mid-October. Then, of course, that first Saturday of November, Ohio State, ranked 3rd in the country right now, visits Happy Valley. Daniel, anything we didn't get to as we get rolling with this game week that you're particularly curious about?
One thing I would add about the point spread is that, I had kind of a similar reaction where when I saw 18, I was kind of like, whoa. But Bill Connolly over at ESPN had his SP Plus projections, which is a whole algorithm that goes way over my head, but it popped out an 18-point spread there for Penn State, Illinois too. So it's not only the bookies, but the computers, all the data that's in there. No, I mean, I think that this is just a really intriguing matchup. Like I said on the post-game pod, have just somehow ended up watching a ton of Illinois this year, I think, because they've had some decent standalone spots from their season opener and then Friday night against Nebraska. And I think it's an entertaining game. And this is kind of what you want, when you're Penn State, getting through these 2 MAC games and finally having that Big Ten opener at home and having it be against a ranked opponent. I know that if you're Penn State and if you're a fan who looks from the, 60,000 foot view, you want every game to be as easy as possible to get you through the year undefeated and into the playoff picture. But I think to have this kind of test now, I think is going to be really fun. And I think it's just a great opportunity for us to learn a lot about this team. I know we said the same thing about West Virginia, but that's like a week 1 game. And that was also weird because of the weather delay and everything. But I think that it's Big Ten versus Big Ten. I think that Illinois definitely has Penn State's attention, definitely has James Franklin's attention. I'm really excited to see what this looks like on Saturday night.
We've got a couple more podcasts leading up to that. As promised, we're going to have an Illinois insider join us midweek to discuss what's going on in Champaign, what's going on so right for them thus far. I'm curious how he feels about that 18-point spread as well when he joins us. But we'll come back. We'll be on the practice field Wednesday. We'll get another episode to you on Thursday, laying out what we've heard, what we've seen, probably some injury updates, and ultimately our predictions for this matchup. But if you want to follow along the way, Lions247.com is the place to be. And I don't want to shortchange our recruiting coverage. And oh, by the way, Penn State just lost the commitment. They had a player flip from their class to Colorado, safety Antonio Branch out of Florida. There's a lot of other things cooking on the recruiting trail right now, and we have all that covered at Lions247.com. Tyler Calvaruso will also be on this next episode to talk about the latest in the recruiting world. Daniel, Mark, always a pleasure. 3 games in the books. We'll see what Big Ten action looks like soon.
Sounds good.
Good stuff from my colleagues at Lions247.com. We will rejoin them again later in the week. In the meantime, as I said, find us over at the site. And we'll hear from Tyler Calvaruso on recruiting, Jeremy Werner on Illinois football in our midweek episode dropping on Wednesday. For now, stepping aside, I am Tyler Donahue. Thanks as always for tuning in to the Lions 24/7 podcast.